Essay 65, Part 5. Schwarzschild must have known of the field equation prior to its publication in November 1915 because he heavily criticized Einstein in a letter of December 1915 in which he declared friendly war, and which he gave his solution to the field equation as mentioned already in this long essay. The rest of the Fogma is entirely meaningless because it too neglects torsion. For example, in 1917, Einstein is supposed to have initiated a cosmology based on Big Bang, one of the densest occurrences of low visibility ever to threaten enlightenment. The truth is that Einstein himself rejected Big Bang in 1939 as being unphysical. In 1918, Einstein is supposed to have introduced gravitational waves, which are supposed to have been observed indirectly in binary pulsars. The truth is that gravitational waves from a mathematically incorrect equation cannot exist in nature, very obviously. Einstein's search for a unified field theory was flawed from the very beginning because of his neglect of torsion. He must surely have known of the existence of torsion from his correspondence with Cartan in the 20s. However, Einstein was already famous and trapped in his own fogma. Whatever the reason, he did not use Cartan geometry as given by Cartan. Cartan made Einstein fully aware of the geometry and provided the geometrical basis for a unified field theory in the early 20s. All that is needed for a unified field theory. In 1929, Einstein used Hamilton's principle in another failed attempt at unification, and in 1950, towards the end of his life, considered the first and second Bianchi identities in a generalized theory of gravitation, but again neglected torsion. The true identity with torsion was given by Cartan and is used in ECE theory. The search for unification by Einstein is a long and heroic one, but was doomed from the outset for the reasons just given, and also because he tried to merge the Maxwell Heaviside equations with his own, sadly incorrect, field equation. This attempt resulted in the Maxwell-Einstein equations as they are known, but again these neglect torsion and are meaningless. In ECE theory, the MH equations are written in a spacetime with torsion and curvature, and themselves become equations of general relativity. In ECE theory, dynamics, gravitation, and electrodynamics are based on Cartan geometry and are based on torsion. In retrospect, it is obvious that Einstein neglected the key and central concept of torsion. Once reinstated, the unification of physics becomes relatively easy with a little bit of imagination. It is also easy to see why the initial fogmatic reactions to ECE were as they were. Unification became maddeningly obvious to those tied up in strings and allergic to Occam's razor. Although Einstein himself had suggested photon mass later than 1906 or so, his 20th century successors became bogged and befogged by the idea of the photon as a particle having no mass. The real introduction of photon mass was by Henri Poincaré in 1905, and that inspired the Debray wave particle dualism. A particle with no mass leads to all kinds of difficulties that were so severe that any sensible scholar would have abandoned the theory and would have gotten by without the funding for the sake of dignity and self-respect. One of these ghastly pragmatic failures was the assertion that electromagnetic radiation in the vacuum could only have transverse polarizations, defying the existence of the third dimension for the sake of gauge invariance. Mass was supposed to have been given to elementary particles by a magical process based on what was known incorrectly as the Higgs boson. In truth, it was devised by others as well as Higgs, but was in any case a failure. CERN has tried to cobble up a Higgs boson, but very few people understand the statistics of CERN, and very few accept the Higgs boson. Certainly not leading intellectuals. In Schwarzschild's letter of December 1915 to Einstein, the former proposed a line element solution to the field equation proposed about a month or so earlier by Einstein. This solution is not that commonly called the Schwarzschild metric, and in the same letter, Schwarzschild heavily criticized the perihelion calculation by Einstein. Unfortunately, Schwarzschild died only a few months later in 1916. Einstein was never able to refute the criticism by Schwarzschild and published only one short note thereafter on perihelion precession. So all the dogma was developed by others, not half understood Einstein. Einstein never returned to perihelion precession after that. This does not give an objective scholar much confidence in the subject of general relativity without torsion. Historical scholarship alone is enough, therefore, to show that neither Einstein nor Schwarzschild correctly predicted the precession of the perihelion of Mercury. The great disservice done to science resides in the endless repetition of the contrary claim that they did. Schwarzschild did not infer the line element solution commonly attributed to him. All that has to be done to confirm this is to read the two papers actually published by Schwarzschild on the subject in 1916, and to read the English translation on the web of his December 1915 letter to Einstein. This is very easily Googled up. The impression given of the years 1915 onwards to the early 20s is also negative in a historical context. It is not clear why the original solution by Schwarzschild of December 1915 was changed, and why the changed solution was attributed falsely to him. The changed solution contains a singularity at the origin and is not a well-behaved mathematical function. For this reason, it seems to have been chosen in order to force the Einstein theory to reduce to the Newton theory. That procedure is not objective science, which compares theory with experimental data, not with another theory. The experiment by Eddington and colleagues carried out on May the 29th, 1919, was based on two papers by Einstein. One of these was published in Annalen der Physik, 35, 1898 to 908, 1911, and the other in Proceedings of the Royal Prussian Academy of 1915, pages 831 to 839. This is also the paper in which the incorrect perihelion precession calculation was given. So Schwarzschild's criticisms hold for the light deflection calculation of Einstein, which was also incorrect. In UFT 150 of the Unified Field Theory series, the incorrectness of the light deflection calculation is shown in several ways. In UFT 194, the basis of the Einstein theory was refuted conclusively in a simple way, using algebra checked by computer. In the 1911 paper, Einstein produced a result for light deflection, which was half that produced in the 1915 paper. Neither of these papers was refereed. In fact, none of Einstein's papers was refereed until the 1940s. The first paper that was refereed by Einstein was rejected, causing Einstein to go into orbit. In 1919, Eddington did not have the precision to test the claims by Einstein, and unfortunately, a given data set was chosen which happened to coincide with the 1915 prediction. It is now possible to measure light deflection accurately, but it cannot be due to Einstein's incorrect theory. The latest work by Horst Eckert and myself has revealed the correct explanation very simply, using the concept of relativistic momentum of ECE relativity. Much simpler than Einstein's incorrect explanation. Shortly after the Eddington experiment had subjectively favoured Einstein by choice of data set, Cartan and colleagues inferred spacetime torsion and showed that the geometry used by Einstein is incorrect because of its incorrect emission of torsion. Einstein was made aware of this by Cartan, as discussed already, but the false impression given by the Eddington experiment meant that his curvature theory was adopted uncritically. For many years, general relativity remained a relatively obscure part of physics, until it was somewhat artificially elevated into cosmology by the Big Bang theory. The term Big Bang was coined by Sir Fred Hoyle as a joke. He rejected the theory by Hawking and Penrose and others, and Einstein himself had rejected it long before Hoyle in 1939. It is a typical media hype of the 20th century, brought about by desire for fame and notoriety, not a desire for science and scholarship and truth. By the time I became an undergraduate in 1968, I'd heard of the Big Bang theory vaguely, but gave it little credence. I had not heard of black hole theory at all. This was another lurid term coined by the otherwise eloquent John Wheeler, Einstein's assistant. My rigorous examination of the claims of Einsteinian general relativity, EGR, began in earnest in 2003, the year in which ECE theory was inferred. I noticed the existence of spacetime torsion in Chapter 3 of Sean Carroll's book, Spacetime and Geometry, An Introduction to General Relativity, Addison Wesley, New York, 2004, and online notes. The ECE theory is based on torsion, and ECE2 is based on torsion plus curvature. They are the first generally covariant unified field theories built in this way. So from the outset I decided that torsion cannot be thrown away with the bathwater. Reading around, it soon became apparent that the EGR was built on the axiomatic or arbitrary suppression of this basic property of geometry. Torsion had been neglected in the early years of geometry because it was not known. Christoffel had arbitrarily defined the connection as being symmetric in about 1869, and it took until about 1922 to realize that it is not symmetric in general. A symmetric connection means zero torsion. Unfortunately for EGR and science, Einstein adopted the symmetric connection in the years 1905 to 1915 for the same reason. It was the only connection of geometry known to mathematics. A lot of my work in the early development of ECE theory consisted of giving proofs with details left out by Carroll as exercises to numbed graduate students at Harvard and elsewhere. These are proofs of the tetrad postulate, the two Cartan structure equations, and the Cartan identity. Later I inferred my own identity using Hodge duals in 4 dimensions and named it the Cartan Evans identity to distinguish it from the Cartan identity. In fact, the Cartan Evans identity is an example of the Cartan identity. All these proofs check themselves as being correct, so I did not leave anything as the proverbial exercise for the student. In order to learn Cartan geometry thoroughly, a mastery of all these proofs is needed, together with a mastery of differential forms, tensors and vectors. There can be no valid criticism of ECE theory because it is based on this well-tried geometry and all these rigorous proofs, each fortifying the other. One of the most important of them is the derivation of the structure of torsion and curvature using the commutator of covariant derivatives, as in UFT 99 and various proofs. This method shows that curvature is always accompanied by torsion, which is why there are 2 Cartan structure equations, one for the torsion form, the other for the curvature form of differential geometry. Up until paper 122 of the Unified Field Theory series, I still accepted the old dogma that the connection is in general asymmetric or without any particular symmetry. It is amusing to note at this stage of enlightenment that this dogma contradicted the other dogma about the Christoffel connection being symmetric. In fact, neither dogmatic assertion is true. The connection is now known to be anti-symmetric, a finding that is alone enough to refute DGR with its symmetric connection, a throwback to Christoffel in 1869. End of part 5.